They said the Boone Ranch was the loneliest stretch of land in the whole Wyoming Valley, but even loneliness can hum beneath the surface like a secret waiting to be found. Curiosity was what drew her there first, the kind that blooms when there's nowhere left to go. Clara May Hensley had been walking for days through the cold, her boots split at the seams, the wind slicing through her threadbare coat. She'd slept in barns, prayed for warmth, and learned that hunger had a voice that growled louder than pride. When she reached Lone Creek's dusty main road, she had nothing left but the faint hope that someone might see her as more than another forgotten woman. Silas Boone saw her before she noticed him. He stood beside his wagon outside the general store, hat pulled low, gloves tucked into his belt. 33 years old, a man carved from quiet habit and long winters, he had the kind of face that spoke of endurance rather than charm. Broad shoulders, a jaw set against the world, and eyes the color of faded denim. He'd come to town for flour, salt, and solitude. But when he saw the woman by the well, thin fingers cupped around a tin mug, something shifted inside him, like a gate opening after too many years rusted shut. She thanked the storekeeper softly, voice raspy from cold. He didn't know her name then, only the way she held herself, proud despite the chill. Behind him, old Ruth Carter whispered to a friend, "That one's trouble, mark my words. No woman alone at that age without a story." Silas pretended not to hear, but he'd long learned that in a small town, stories were as dangerous as storms. When he stepped forward, Clara's eyes lifted in surprise. "You lookin' for work?" he asked, his tone even, not unkind. She hesitated, studying him, his clean coat, his quiet steadiness. "Only till the cold passes," she said. "I can cook so clean." He nodded once. "I could use someone who knows how to make a fire last through the night. The ranch gets lonesome when the snow comes." It wasn't quite an invitation, not quite mercy either, but it was enough. She climbed onto his wagon beside him, hands folded in her lap, while the town's eyes followed their departure like crows on a fence line. The ride out was long, the landscape bare but beautiful, low hills, skeletal trees, frost glittering like powdered glass on every fence post. Silas didn't speak much, he wasn't a man of words. But he noticed how she kept her gaze on the horizon, as if measuring how far she'd come from something unnamed. He offered her a blanket, and she accepted it with a whisper of thanks that trembled like a string plucked in a cold room. At the ranch, the house waited, large, weathered, and silent. The front door creaked as if startled to be opened. "You'll find the kitchen through there," he said, gesturing. "I'll show you the stove come mornin'. There's wood stacked out back." Clara nodded, eyes darting over the high-beamed ceilings, the empty mantel, the way the shadows clung to the walls like memories. She could tell a woman's touch had once been here. Lace curtains yellowed by time, a rocking chair still angled toward the window as if waiting for someone to return. She didn't ask? He didn't offer. Silence was their common language. That first night, she cooked in near darkness, the lantern flickering over her hands as she stirred a pot of stew. He ate quietly, shoulders hunched, the only sound the clink of his spoon. She watched him from the corner of her eye, how he folded his napkin, how he thanked her without looking up. Something about his stillness unnerved her. But when he said good night, his voice carried a gentleness that made her chest ache in a way hunger never had. Days slipped into a rhythm. She rose before dawn, stoked the fire, and made coffee strong enough to chase away ghosts. Silas rode the fields, returning each evening with the smell of frost and leather clinging to him. They spoke little, yet every silence held weight. When he entered the kitchen, she felt his presence before hearing his boots. Once he lingered by the doorway as she hummed to herself, an old hymn she half remembered. His breath caught, just barely. That song, he thought, had been his wife's favorite. In town, gossip grew like weeds. Old Ruth told anyone who'd listen that the widow's ghost must be spinning in her grave. "He's lost his mind," she said, "taking in some stray girl under his roof." Clara heard it once when she rode in for flour. The laughter behind her back burned more than the wind. She didn't speak on the ride home. That evening, Silas noticed her silence, and asked if the road had been rough. "Rougher than most," she said softly, staring into the fire. He understood more than she realized. After a long pause, he said, "Let him talk. Folks in town wouldn't know kindness if it warmed their hands." It was the first time his words carried something like anger, not for himself, but for her. That night, snow began to fall. It came quietly, first as dust, then as a curtain. Clara stood by the window, watching the world fade to white. The glow of the lamp softened her face, and for the first time, she looked like she belonged there, like the house had been waiting for her to step into the light. Silas, standing behind her, wanted to say something, anything, but words felt clumsy in his mouth. Instead, he fetched another log for the fire, laid it gently across the embers, and said, "You'll need that in the morning." She smiled faintly, not turning around. "You always think ahead, Mr. Boone." His answer was quiet. "Sometimes that's all a man can do." The days shortened. The wind grew crueler. Yet between them, something began to thaw. When she laughed once, soft, unguarded, he looked up from his ledger and felt something alive stir in the hollow of his chest. When he cut wood, he stacked twice as much near her quarters. When she mended his coat, she stitched a tear with care no hired woman would bother to give. Each act small, unnoticed, but heavy with meaning neither dared name. One morning, she found him sitting on the porch, coffee steaming in his hands. He looked out toward the hills, where the snow glimmered like glass over the fence lines. "You ever get tired of quiet?" she asked, stepping beside him. He thought a moment, eyes never leaving the horizon. "No," he said finally. "But sometimes I get tired of being the only one who hears it." She understood then that his solitude wasn't pride, it was punishment. As December deepened, so did their understanding of each other. The unspoken grew dense in the air, tender and fragile. Still, she felt the town's eyes on her even from miles away. Some evenings, she thought of leaving, of sparing him the talk that might cost him his good name. But each time, she'd glance toward the kitchen door where his hat hung beside hers, two shapes side by side, and she'd stay. The storm came without warning, a white veil sweeping down the valley. That night, they worked to save the horses, pulling at frozen ropes, breath clouding in the dark. When she slipped, his hands caught her, steady and warm despite the cold. For a heartbeat, they didn't move. The wind howled, but between them there was only stillness, the kind that feels like truth. "You should rest," he said, his voice rough. "I can't," she whispered. "I don't know how." Their eyes met, and something passed between them, something quiet, inevitable. When the storm eased, she sat by the fire, hair damp, shoulders trembling. He brought her tea, set it by her hand. "You've made this place feel alive again," he said. It wasn't a confession, but it was close enough. She met his gaze for the first time fully, and what she saw there made her heartbeat stumble. Grief, yes, but also grace. Outside, the snow kept falling, soft and endless, sealing them in together. Inside, something fragile had begun to bloom, and neither one dared to speak of it, because sometimes the heart's truest promises are the ones left unspoken. Winter settled over Lone Creek like a long exhale, burying fences and tracks beneath layers of silence. The ranch was a world of white now, its only movements the slow curl of smoke from the chimney and the faint prints of two people trying to keep the cold from swallowing them whole. Clara had grown used to the rhythm of the place. The sound of Silas's boots across the porch, the scrape of his chair when he joined her for supper, the way the fire's reflection painted his face in flickering gold. Yet what had once been silence between them had turned into something tender, something neither of them knew how to name without breaking it. One morning, as the sun rose pale over the hills, Clara found a small sprig of dried lavender set by her plate. No note. No words. Just the lavender, faintly fragrant, a memory of warmer days. Her fingers lingered over it as she looked toward him across the table. He didn't meet her eyes, just muttered about the fence needing mending and left before she could speak. But when the door shut behind him, a strange warmth spread through her chest. In the quiet of that kitchen, she realized she was no longer a guest here. She was a piece of the silence that held the house together. The townsfolk, though, were less generous in their imagining. Every few weeks, when Clara rode into town for supplies, she could feel the whispers like sleet against her back. Women glanced away too quickly, men looked too long. Ruth Carter's voice carried loudest of all. "A decent woman wouldn't stay out there alone," she said one day near the post office. "No ring, no preacher, just him and her in that house. What kind of arrangement do you think that is?" Clara didn't answer. She simply took her flour and sugar and rode home through the wind, each word pressing into her heart like a nail. She told herself the snow would bury the gossip as surely as it buried the fields, but shame, once stirred, doesn't quiet easily. That night, she barely spoke during supper. The crackle of the fire filled the spaces her voice should have. Silas noticed, setting his spoon down slowly. "Town talk again?" he asked. She gave a small nod, eyes fixed on her lap. "They think I'm here for your money," she murmured. "Or worse." His chair creaked as he leaned forward, his voice low and steady. "You know better than that, Clara." She looked up then, eyes bright with unshed tears. "Maybe. But I can't stand being the reason folks look at you that way." He shook his head. "They've been looking at me with pity since my wife died. I can live with talk." There was a long pause before he added, almost softly, "I couldn't live with you leaving Dot." For the first time, she saw the man beneath the stoic mask, wounded, yes, but brave in a quiet way. He rose, walked to the window, and stared out into the storm. "You know, sometimes I think the world don't forgive folks for trying to start again," he said. "But maybe that's all starting again is, defeating what people expect of you." She didn't answer, but his words stayed with her long after the lamps were dimmed. The following week brought a cold unlike any before. Wind roared down the valley, driving snow into every crack and seam. They spent their days fighting against it, hauling feed, checking the barn, praying the roof held. The isolation deepened, and with it, their dependence on one another. One evening, when the storm howled loud enough to rattle the glass, Clara sat by the hearth, mending Silas's coat. He watched her in silence for a long time before saying, "You make this place look different somehow." She glanced up. "Different how?" He hesitated, fingers tracing the rim of his mug. "Like it was meant to be lived in again." Her throat tightened. "Maybe it was always meant to be," she said. "Just waiting on someone stubborn enough to try. But peace, like fire, needs tending." The next morning, a knock came at the door. Deputy Earl Maddox, his mustache rimed with frost, eyes cold with judgment. "Boone," he said, stepping inside without invitation. "Town's concerned. They say you've taken a woman in improper. You oughta send her on her way before it gets uglier." Silas stood tall, jaw tightening. "She's got a roof here because I offered it. That's all." The deputy gave a humorless chuckle. "Doesn't look like all from where folks sit." Clara appeared in the doorway then, her expression calm though her hands trembled. "You can tell the town I'll be gone by morning," she said quietly. Silas turned to her, startled. "You don't have to, I do," she interrupted, voice steady. "You don't owe me your good name." When the deputy left, the silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Silas paced once, twice, then stopped before her. "You think I give a damn what they say?" he asked, voice rough. "They already took enough from me. I won't let them take you too." She looked up at him then, eyes glistening in the firelight. "Then what am I to you, Silas Boone?" The question hung like smoke between them. He didn't answer right away. "You're the first thing that's felt alive in this house since she passed," he said finally. "And the only thing I'm afraid to lose." The wind howled outside as though echoing his confession. The firelight flickered across their faces, hers open with disbelief, his shadowed with longing he hadn't meant to speak aloud. She stepped closer, the hem of her dress brushing his boots. "If I stay," she whispered, "it can't be as your cook." His breath caught, and something unspoken passed between them, fragile but fierce. "Then stay as what you are," he said. My peace. Before she could answer, a deep rumble shook the walls. They rushed outside to find part of the barn roof caved under the weight of snow. Inside, the horses thrashed, trapped beneath splintered beams. Without hesitation, Silas ran into the wreckage, shoving aside broken planks. Clara followed, shouting for him to stop, but the wind stole her words. He freed one horse, then another, before a beam collapsed beside him, striking his shoulder. She screamed his name and plunged forward, dragging him clear as snow poured in through the shattered roof. Together they crawled out, gasping, covered in frost and blood. When dawn broke, the storm had stilled. The world lay blank and quiet, painted in soft light. Silas sat slumped against the fence, face pale, arm bound in a torn blanket. Clara knelt beside him, brushing snow from his hair. You fool! She murmured, tears falling unchecked. You'd risk your life for a barn? His lips curved faintly. Didn't figure it'd be much of a life without you in it. She pressed her forehead to his, their breath mingling in the cold air. You're gonna be fine, she said. You hear me? He smiled weakly. I hear you, Clara May. Clear as the morning. The days that followed were slow but full, nursing him back to strength, mending what the storm had broken. When the thaw finally came, sunlight spilled over the valley like forgiveness. The town said little after that. Some stories, once tested by fire and snow, no longer invite gossip, they invite respect. One evening, as they stood on the porch watching the last drifts melt, Silas reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The air smelled of wet earth and cedar. Feels like the world's starting over, she said softly. He nodded. Maybe it is. Maybe we are. The wind shifted then, carrying the faint scent of spring and the sound of water running free beneath the ice. Clara leaned her head against his shoulder, eyes closing. The ranch that had once stood hollow and cold now pulsed with quiet life again. For the first time, either of them felt the need to fill the silence. It was enough simply to be there, to know they had both endured the long winter and found, in each other, a warmth that would not fade with the snow.